My name is Eric Toney, Fond du Lac County District Attorney, and as we announced, we were going to be sharing some information related to some election fraud charges that have been filed here in Fond du Lac County. And we have seen our elections under scrutiny more so perhaps in the past 2 years than ever before, which has led to a heightened citizen engagement and calls to hold those accountable that may violate our election laws. And that makes sense given our elections are the cornerstone of our democracy, and we must protect the integrity of our electoral process at every turn, regardless of political preference. And in the city of Fond du Lac, a member or community member ended up sending information to the Fond du Lac Police Department reporting a possible election fraud violation of people illegally registering to vote. That triggered an investigation by the city of Fond du Lac Police Department in which they learned the allegations are that 5 individuals illegally registered to vote using a P.O. box address at the UPS store in the city of Fond du Lac. That UPS store does not have any residential addresses to it, and the city of Fond du Lac Police Department then attempted to interview all of the individuals that had registered with the P.O. box store, which has resulted in what will be 5 cases filed for illegal registration, with 3 of those 5 that had voted in the November 2020 election. And it is important to note that anybody that is charged as a result of this is presumed innocent unless or until proven guilty. And I also want to just note we have some fantastic clerks here in Fond du Lac County that do a wonderful job running and administering our elections and have been helpful in providing information during this investigation, giving guidance to law enforcement as well as to my office. And one of the things that's important to, as a takeaway from this, is these type of referrals to DAs have happened in other counties where people have illegally registered to vote, and it's not an issue that's unique to Fond du Lac County, so it's important to draw attention to this so people understand how do they vote or register to make sure that they don't end up with a referral to a local district attorney that could result in a felony voter fraud charge, because we want to make sure that people have the ability to exercise their right to vote and that they do so legally. One of the issues we see at times, if somebody doesn't have a stable address, they may assume that they just list a P.O. box or something else, which the law doesn't allow for. They would actually have to list where they would be residing, even if that doesn't have a specific residential address, because I can tell you as a district attorney, and I think I can speak on behalf of most law enforcement, we don't want to have to be investigating these types of cases or filing these. We want people to be able to vote, to follow the proper process, and make sure that they understand what that process is. And understanding we've had these referrals to other DAs throughout the state, it's important to draw attention to this in the hopes that we don't see these type of criminal referrals and charges in the future. And it's an important opportunity to educate the public. One of the other issues that we have seen is we have seen lawsuit after lawsuit related to some of our elections. At times it's after the fact once votes are counted, or lawsuits are dismissed because there's a lack of standing for somebody to actually challenge or intervene if there's illegal activity going on with our elections. And one of the ways that we can prevent that from happening is using similar statutes that we have for public meetings, open records, as well as our state ethics code, and applying that to our election code, which would take a legislative change. And what we are allowed to do in our ethics code and some of our public open records law, somebody can file a verified complaint with a district attorney, and they can say this person has broken the law or they've committed an ethics code, and the district attorney can then file a criminal charge, a civil forfeiture, or at times in the ethics code, even an injunction to stop that behavior from occurring. And if we're going to trust local DAs to enforce our open meetings and our state ethics code, we should also trust district attorneys to enforce our election laws, because the importance of that is that it would allow DAs to intervene before the activity has been completed or before the ballots are occurred, so we don't end up with some of the questions we see after the election results have been completed. One of the other aspects of the ethics code, it allows a DA in some circumstances of an adjoining county to also file a criminal complaint if somebody has violated the law if the DA does not act, and we could apply that same principle to our election code. One of the things we know is when people know that they are held accountable, they're more apt to follow the law and make sure they understand what they're doing. And as I mentioned, we have fantastic clerks here in Fond du Lac County, and we have so many outstanding clerks across Wisconsin. One of the challenges that we see is there's often a difficulty in getting guidance for our clerks, whether it's from the Wisconsin Election Commission, and now we see at times they're tied 3-3 and there's no official guidance coming from them, and at times that guidance has actually been contrary to Wisconsin statute, and that puts our clerks in incredibly difficult positions where they're trying to do the best they can and they're not getting the support they need from our Wisconsin Election Commission. And this would give local district attorneys and the community the opportunity to be engaged in protecting the integrity of our electoral process, because it doesn't matter which political party anybody is part of. We all want to make sure we protect the integrity of our elections, and that means that we enforce our election laws without preference to political party or what the violations are, because the public demands that we have integrity in that process, and we will do that from our office just as our law enforcement has in investigating and referring these cases to the district attorney's office. I'm happy to take any questions as well, and I think as I noted, we will send out copies of the criminal complaints to anybody that would like to have access to those. Just make sure we get your business card, but happy to take any questions on anything as well.
Were these people homeless?
No, there were people that, some of the allegations include people that had a travel trailer that would drive across the country. They would stay in different parts of Fond du Lac County or Wisconsin, or they had a residence that was not stable. And one of the important things to understand is even if somebody doesn't have a stable residence, they're still able to vote. They're still able to register. It's just a question of making sure they do it lawfully and not listing a P.O. box, because when you're registering to vote, you clearly don't live at a P.O. box. There's a specific residence that someone would live at, even if it doesn't have a residential address. One of the challenges that we see for our clerks is people would wonder, well, why wouldn't the clerk catch this? Well, that's because on the registration form, it's not being listed as a P.O. box. It appears like it might be an apartment or a condo, and that makes it difficult for the clerk to understand that that's not an actual residence.
Is it just they just didn't understand the law?
I'm not going to speak on behalf of those individuals. And one thing, you know, Greg, we've had these conversations, I think, over the years. Ignorance of the law is not a defense.
There wasn't enough evidence to overturn the 2020 election. So is this a way to sort of fuel a fire that suggests that the overall results were in fact fraudulent?
I'm sorry, could you ask that question again?
Yeah, sure. So the 2020 election, there wasn't enough evidence to overturn the 2020 election. So is this kind of a way to fuel a fire that suggests that the overall results were in fact fraudulent?
No. This is not at all related to that. As I've said, this is about protecting the integrity of our electoral process. And if somebody has violated our election law, we're going to take that seriously. It has nothing to do with that type of argument. And the role of a district attorney is to enforce the rule of law and for justice, not to pick and choose what are we going to enforce or what do we like or not like. We follow the rule of law in our legislature. They're the ones that set the law. As a district attorney, we follow and enforce the law. And here we've had violations that have been referred to us by law enforcement. And we're talking about 5 cases, 2 other cases that we previously filed, so 7 total cases in Fond du Lac County. It is clear that that would have had no impact on any election results as far as who would have won a race, and we're in no way saying it would have impacted that.
You just talk that you mentioned the charge. Is it a misdemeanor? Is it what's the penalty? I mean, will they be able, if they're convicted, will they be able to vote again?
So these are Class I felonies that have been filed. So if somebody is convicted, they would not be able to vote again until their civil rights would be restored. And so as an example, if somebody's convicted of a felony and they're on probation during that, or if they went to prison and were released on extended supervision, they wouldn't be able to vote until they completed the sentence, which would include that probation or supervision.
Are these people trying to deceive the system? Or do they just, this is where they got their mail, so that's where they register?
Well, it's important to understand when people register to vote, you don't register where you get your mail, you register where you live. And as I mentioned before, this is an important opportunity for education on this issue, because we see these referrals coming to district attorneys across the state, and we want to make sure people understand this is how you lawfully register, because we don't want to have to be filing these cases, and we want to make sure the public understands how do they vote, and to draw attention to these issues to make sure that our clerks aren't having to deal with this, that law enforcement and DAs aren't having to deal with this. As we see the surge in violent crime and drugs, that's where law enforcement's attention should be, and that's where we unfortunately need it to be right now, and we don't want to see these types of referrals coming in, and so it's an important opportunity to educate the public.
So educate the public, how if you are homeless or you live in a travel trailer and travel out, how do you register to vote if you don't necessarily have a permanent address?
And so what they would do is where are they staying, where are they normally going to be at, that's where they would register to vote. And if they're riding the park bench near First and Main or wherever that particular location would be, and it's important to understand that it's not writing a P.O. box in or an address at which you don't live at.
You could literally put I live at a park bench.
I don't make the law, I just follow the law, and that's what we want to make sure the public is also doing, is following the law so that we can avoid these types of issues happening.
Do you know who these people voted for?
Well, we did have some information which is included in one of the criminal complaints where when we do these investigations, we're not asking who somebody votes for because we don't care. It doesn't matter if they voted for Republicans, Democrats, or someone else. We do know, I think we can infer reasonably that at least one of the individuals voted for President Trump and actually indicated that they wanted voter fraud to be looked at, and we don't make a distinction on political preference when reviewing these types of cases.
Just explain a little bit your legislative proposal and like how would this work?
So what this would require is a change to our election code so that, for example, in this circumstance, we had a citizen that filed some, information with law enforcement to say we think that somebody violated the elections code by illegally registering. Now, for example, if drop boxes were illegal and a community was using them, and a community member saw that, under this proposal, they could file a verified complaint with a district attorney asking them to intervene. That DA could then file an injunction in circuit court to prevent that ballot box from being in operation so that it would occur before the votes are being counted to ensure that we protect the integrity of the process, because ultimately that's what we want to see is this on the front end, because once the votes are counted, it's too late, and on top of that, charging somebody with a crime cannot undo what occurred. And as we've seen over the past 1 to 2 years, there are times where there are violations of election code, but there's no corresponding criminal penalty, and this gives an opportunity to prevent those things from actually taking place and allows the community to continue to be the watchdog.
Did the citizen come forward to the PD before the election?
No, it was after the election where and I don't necessarily know how that individual gathered all of this particular information, but when we get those type of information, because we do get other community members that will refer information to our office or to law enforcement alleging potential voter fraud, and our law enforcement does a wonderful job here in Fond du Lac County of investigating those types of cases and seeing if there's any merit to it or not, and that's led to now what will be 7 cases filed here in Fond du Lac County.